Hey, if you needed more motivation to have the best DC summer ever, this is it. District Bridges' Summer Bucket List runs June 15th to August 15th across DC. Here's how it works. Earn points and climb District Bridges' leaderboard by supporting local businesses, attending cool events, and crossing things off your summer bucket list. Top players can earn up to $250 in local business gift cards just by visiting pools, exploring museums, and sipping frozen cocktails. It's the ultimate DC staycation. Show some love for the city we call home. Join the summer bucket list and celebrate what makes DC truly special. Sign up now and track your progress at districtbridges.org/DC Summer Bucket List. Today on CityCast DC, voters in Ward 8 are about to decide whether to send Trayon White back to the DC Council. This is just months after he was indicted on bribery charges and then expelled from the body. Winning re-election would elevate White's case to the pantheon of DC political scandals. Which got me thinking, what are the other legendary scandals that locals ought to know about? NBC4's Mark Segraves has been covering city politics for years, and he's going to walk us, or maybe perp walk us, down memory lane. Today is Monday, June 30th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Michael.
So you always hear people say, like, DC is so corrupt or imply it's uniquely corrupt. I actually don't think it's any more corrupt than most places. But we've had our fair share of political scandals all the same. You've covered the city for a long time. Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite? That's a good question. Certainly Harry Thomas comes first to mind because it was so blatant. And Harry Thomas, I covered it gavel to gavel, and I knew him very well at the time when it happened.
For newcomers, Harry Thomas Jr. was the son of Harry Thomas Sr., who had been a longtime DC council member. Jr. got on there. Weirdly, at that time, there was three sort of sons of political figures on the council, and all of their runs ended poorly. Explain what Harry Thomas Jr. did and how it caught up with him.
So Harry Thomas was the council member from Ward 5, as you said, the son of a longtime council member, Harry Thomas Sr. He had started a nonprofit almost as soon as he was elected. I think maybe even before he took office. He started a nonprofit that was focused on youth sports and taking kids to ball games and supporting youth athletics and whatnot. And he facilitated getting district money into that nonprofit. And as it turned out, he was spending that money on himself, on a Harley Davidson, on trips to lavish golf courses around the country, a luxury SUV that he actually drove up to the press conference outside of the Wilson Building. I'll never forget this. The day that he was indicted, he and his lawyer, Fred Cook, drove up to that press conference in that SUV that was part of the indictment. And I think the reason it really stands out to me is that year, the first year Adrian Finty was elected mayor, we had a basketball game where the members of the DC Press Corps played the members of the DC Council, and we played that at the Verizon Center, on the floor of the Verizon Center. It was a great event, and we had T-shirts printed up for our uniforms that Harry Thomas printed up, that we paid Harry Thomas to print for us. Right? And you see where this is going, right? And he used that scam nonprofit group of his to make our T-shirts, our jerseys for that game. So it was just a really, a bold way that he did it, and he got caught and really didn't try to make much excuses for it at first until the writing was on the wall that he was going to go to jail for that. And to me, it was one of the worst because he really did it simply to benefit himself in no uncertain terms, right? You can talk about Marion Barry and his drugs, and Kwame Brown, what he did was wrong, but a lot of people have lied about their income in order to get a loan. But this guy was taking tens of thousands of dollars in district funds that were intended for young people, and he was using them for himself. It really was one of the worst examples, in my opinion, that I've covered in DC.
I've got my own memory of that, which, I had I'd worked in Philadelphia for a while, and then I moved back home to DC right before this happened. And covering the Philadelphia City Council, like there's a long sort of legacy and a lot of lore about corruption there too. And I remember this is a thing that the feds do when they indict someone. They'll release a list of things that the person spent their ill-gotten money on. And one of the things that stood out was he'd gone to Hooters. Of all the places to take the credit card, you could go to great restaurants, but he went to Hooters. And one of the reporters had called one of my old sources in Philly and sort of run all this past him. And the source says, that stupid SOB. You never use credit cards, never. And it made me think of like our scandal culture was pretty podunk. You got to use envelopes full of cash. You can't use your credit card. They're going to catch you.
Well, as we found, even with mugs and envelopes full of cash, we've had our council members get arrested and caught before. So, good memories.
So this was 2010, 2011 period. There had been 3 people on the DC Council who were the sons of prominent DC political figures. The other 2 got in trouble also. One was Kwame Brown, who you mentioned, who'd been the DC Council chair and then had to resign, did not actually, I don't think, go to jail. What was the story there?
So Kwame Brown spent an hour in jail, in custody, not actually in jail. So Kwame Brown was chairman of the DC Council at the time, and he was being investigated because there was money from his campaign that was unaccounted for, thousands of dollars. And as you mentioned, his father, Marshall Brown, and his family were big political operators in this town back then. And throughout the investigation, other things turned up, and he ended up taking a plea deal. And what he pled guilty to, it might have been mail fraud or wire fraud, but what it came down to was that he falsified his income on a form so that he could get a loan for his boat that was called Bulletproof. We all ran down to the yacht club to get video of his bulletproof boat. And he mailed or he faxed that in from his DC Council office. That was the crime, that he falsified his income and he faxed that form in from his DC Council office fax machine.
I think pretty much any story involving a boat called Bulletproof does not end well for the boat owner.
That's correct. And so the judge sentenced him to detention of the rest of the day. I remember we were in federal court, and the judge said, take him into custody until 5:00. And the marshals took him down in the basement of the federal courthouse, kept him there in custody until the end of the day when he was able to leave. It was a few hours. He didn't spend much time in custody. But again, for that, my most vivid memory was his last day in his office. And he was in his office on the 5th floor of the Wilson building. And all the reporters, there's a great picture that I still have somewhere of all of us sitting on the floor waiting for him to come out, for him to finally come out after he'd given his resignation. The windows in his office were shaded, but you could see silhouettes behind it, and we could see him because he was shorter than everybody else, and we could tell it was him, and they were gathered around in a prayer circle inside of his office. And when he finally came out, he had this staffer who had an umbrella, and he waved it like a sword to fend off the reporters who were trying to get comments. And Kwame and my son went to school together. So I would see Kwame frequently at school. I would see him on parent teacher night and at all the events afterward. And he was just bitter for a long time about the way he thought he was improperly treated by the press during that scandal.
Yeah, he used to have in his office that famous George Lois magazine cover of Muhammad Ali with all these arrows sticking into him.
Oh, that's right.
But as you said, the allegedly or actually falsifying your tax records not so sexy as scandals go. Unlike the third of the 3 sons, Michael Brown, where there actually was like mugs of money and stuff.
Right. So he was flat out taking bribes, right? And this was a sting operation by the FBI. And they released that infamous picture of him with a Washington football team travel mug that was filled with cash. And, Michael Brown was going through a tough time personally and financially at that time in his life. And apparently needed the money and obviously made a mistake and took that bribe. This was the least sexy of them all because it came and went pretty quickly. And then Michael Brown kind of disappeared, vanished, did not stick around. Whereas you have Harry Thomas had flirted with coming back and running for office again. He ended up not, but he flirted with that. Kwame Brown has a podcast and still shows up at events and is very active in the city. Michael Brown, not so much.
So he went to prison?
Michael Brown did go to prison. Yes. I can't remember exactly for how long he served, but he did go to prison for that.
So one recent scandal that did not lead to even a conviction, but did get somebody thrown off the council involved Jack Evans, the former councilman from Ward 2. The FBI raided his house. This was covered, became a thing with Republicans in Congress. What was the suspicion that never led to an indictment, and how did it play out?
So as former Councilmember Evans would be quick to say, unindicted and undefeated is how he left office. So Councilmember Evans walked right up to the line of what was legal and what was just improper. And he was using his influence as a member of the board of directors for Metro and as a council member for various things, whether it was getting his children job interviews or whether it was influence at Metro on things. And so the first thing that happened to him was he got kicked off of the Metro board. And then the council opened up their own investigation. And they played it out pretty much the same way as it did with Trayon White, where they had their own internal investigation. They had an ad hoc committee. The committee voted to remove him from office. And then it was going to go to the full council for a vote. And before it got to the full council, Jack Evans, unlike Trayon White, resigned himself, didn't make the council go through the process of actually removing him from office. My favorite memory of that is being outside his house the day that the FBI raided his home in Georgetown. Again, with all the reporters standing outside. And I will, in the interest of full disclosure, I've had a very good, close relationship with Councilmember Evans over the years when he was in council and even to this day. So I knew him really well. And I knew his lawyer, Mark Toohey. I had known him for many, many, many years as well. So we're all standing outside the house. The FBI leaves and none of the reporters want to go knock on his door. And they all looked to me and I drew the short straw. So I had to go up and knock on Jack's front door and he came to the door. And I asked him, hey, will you come out and talk to us? And he waved to everybody and said, no, I've got nothing to say. And he was very polite. His lawyer came out and talked to us a little bit quickly out there. But again, the FBI never charged him. And to this day, he maintains, that he did nothing illegal. He was never charged with doing anything illegal. He certainly crossed the line ethically and acknowledged that in his resignation. But again, unlike some of the others, Evans has done a really good job of rebuilding his reputation and not falling out of the public eye.
He works for the city again, right?
He does, right. So he was actually named to the Arts Council. He was, and now Mayor Bowser's administration has hired him. He's in the bowels of some DC government agency now, working as an attorney. And I would say, as far as resurrecting your reputation, Evans has done as good a job as any. Well, certainly Barry was able to get back into elected office, right? And we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Right.
But I'll tell you what, the book is not closed on Jack Evans. And I would be surprised if before the end of time, we don't see Evans' name on a ballot again, because he makes no secret that he's eager to get back into the game. It is killing him not to be on the DC Council as they debate bringing the football team back. This has always been the cornerstone of Evans' political career is bringing sports teams to DC, the Nationals being the biggest one to point to, that he was at the center of that effort then. So again, it cost him his seat on the DC Council. It cost him a lot of respect and some public humiliation, but he's done a really great job, a textbook job of kind of rehabilitating himself in the public eye.
So I think one of the things that makes, at least for me, these sort of local scandals in DC and the suburbs compelling is in our media in Washington, obviously they're focused on the highest profile industry in town, which is politics. And then in the period of DC having home rule, there's been Watergate, there's been former Kennedy alleged mistress murdered on the towpath in Georgetown. There was that huge, horrible scandal involving the Congressional Page program. These are like big, and they're obviously there's going to be some comic moments in them, but they're big and pretty wretched in a lot of ways. And so these sort of venial local government scandals are like a nice respite for you.
It's a little bit more hometowny
Yeah.
than the others. But look, the thing that hurts the most about these scandals is the district's political vulnerability because we are not a state and we don't have voting representation in Congress. And so, unlike every other jurisdiction, I mean, look what's happened in the past years up in New Jersey and New York and whatnot. And you don't see members of Congress clamoring to take over those cities or states when they have these issues. But whenever DC has a scandal like this, it gives ammunition to, and we're seeing it on the Capitol Hill right now, right? Members of Congress wanting to undo multiple DC laws and making the case that, you had one member of Congress saying DC is nothing but federal property. They can do whatever they want with DC and they have the right to oversee. And so when you have these scandals, and that is one of the things I believe motivated the council to vote Trayon White off the council, is they wanted to send a message to Congress that they can take care of their own business and their own problems without Congress or the White House interfering. Right. And so that's what exasperates these scandals, is that it gives the federal government, Congress and the White House, ammunition to come after DC at a time when home rule is incredibly fragile right now.
Yeah, statehood means your local polis can act like clowns and no one's going to take it away from you.
It does, yes.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Right, so speaking of acting like clowns, but also of engendering or engineering amazing comebacks, the sort of mother of all Washington political scandals involves the former mayor, four-term mayor, Marion Barrett. He had a few scandals, but the biggest one began right towards the end of his third term. What are your memories of that time?
So, I knew Marion Barry well and got along with him and respected him. I was not a reporter during the time when he was arrested at the Vista International Hotel with the infamous crack pipe smoking video. But I'll tell you what I remember as a DC resident is the outrage that many DC residents felt that the federal government spent millions and millions of dollars to set this guy up and take him down simply for using drugs. And
right, so there was a sense of it being like this was not a guy taking money that was supposed to go to kids. This was a sin of the flesh.
That's correct.
On the other hand, it was a moment when the streets were running with blood from the
absolutely, and people had a lot of problems with Marion Barry, and there were people around Marion Barry who had gotten into trouble and who were taking money and contracts and things like that. So it wasn't a perfect world, but it's like when they went after Al Capone for tax evasion, right? They were just trying to get him on something, and that was the case with Barry. And they knew what his weakness was. women and drugs, and they played on that. And we saw the result of that. His ability to get back into office, to get back into elected office
Mm-hmm.
after that, kind of showed two things. One, that, yeah, the residents and voters of DC realized what the federal government had done, and they didn't like that.
Right.
And two, there was just a lot of people who just really loved Marion Barry. I got to tell you, say what you will about the man, but walking down the street with Marion Barry, particularly in Ward 8 in Anacostia, to the most underserved communities, he gave this feeling of empowerment to residents that I have never seen any other politician give to anybody ever. It was because they felt like he was in there fighting for them, and that he was one of them, and that they had been persecuted and targeted by police. And this is all what, Trayon White is trying to play off of that now, and people just aren't buying it like he wants them to. But with Barry, it was real and it was resonating, and it was a horrible time because you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't turn on TV without late night comedians making fun of DC. And I remember specifically years and years later, Bill Maher coming to the comedy club downtown. And Barry was long out of office at this point. And he started making Marion Barry jokes. And they fell flat. And Maher chastised the audience and said, "Hey, if you guys don't get these jokes here, nobody's going to get these jokes around the country."
Right.
And somebody in the audience sitting at my table yelled out at him, "We get the jokes. It's just not funny." And it was just like this moment. And so it was hard on the city because it drew national attention to us in the worst possible ways. And it just became, you say Marion Barry outside of DC, even to this day, and that's what you get. Bitch set me up. You get that whole crack smoking mayor in the hotel room visual. And it's really unfortunate because it did not define his career and what he meant to Washington, D.C. And I think he tried and did prove that when he came back to public office, particularly as a council member. In his final years as a council member for Ward 8, he fought hard for the residents of Ward 8. And what was so great of it, and I remember this was, right when they were first opening up the closed door meetings that are now closed again to the press, that I got thrown out of just the other day. But I would go to those meetings and he would sit in there. And because he had been mayor for so many years, he knew how the district government worked better than anybody. And if he wanted to block legislation, he knew how to do it. He knew how it worked. And I'll never forget a moment in one of those meetings when Fenty was mayor, Barry was a council member, and they were going at it. They were yelling. And Fenty looked at him across the table and said, "I'm the mayor now." And Barry just smiled at him. And it was just a real moment in DC government history. But, it's certainly the most famous scandal. But, he's not the only one to resurrect his career. Vince Gray, also had a terrible scandal when he was mayor that cost him his job as mayor, but then was able to come back and get elected to the Ward 7 council seat where he served for many years until recently.
So I'm curious. I'd love to know what you think. We've got it, as we mentioned at the top, we've got another scandal brewing now. Trayon White, who was arrested for allegedly straight up bribe taking. And he got kicked off. He's now trying to run again. And as you said, he's trying to claim the same sort of mantle as Barry, running in a part of town where a lot of people have had bad experiences with law enforcement. A lot of people have suspicions about law enforcement targeting black men, etc. Barry capitalized on that. It doesn't seem to be doing as well for Trayon. And I wonder, that the allegations are really different. What if, in a hypothetical, what if Barry had been caught taking bribes the way Trayon White was? Do you think there would have been the same amount of forgiveness for him? Do you think he would have been able to pull off that amazing comeback he did when he became mayor again?
Yeah, not citywide. Not citywide. In Ward 8, yes. I think he probably would have. I think he was bulletproof, to use a phrase we used earlier, in Ward 8, but not citywide. He was the real victim. He was hurting himself. He wasn't lining his pockets. Look, Marion Barry did not die a wealthy man. I think if he had gotten caught taking bribes, straight out cash bribes like that, it would have been a very different scenario for Marion Barry. But for former Councilmember White, you have the photographs, you have the testimony. It looks very clear that he's in the car with envelopes of cash. He maintains his innocence to this day, and his trial won't begin until 2026. And so, we'll see what happens in this special election. But it's very, very, very possible that he'll get reelected, and that will set up an enormous problem for the 12 members of the DC Council as to whether or not to vote him off the council a second time, and for a second time overturn the will of the voters. Because former Councilmember White makes this point, and it's a very valid point. He was reelected to office after he was indicted. You have to expect that the majority of the people who voted for him knew that he was under indictment for bribery when they voted to put him back on the council, and they voted for him overwhelmingly anyway. And so now, if he gets elected a second time while he's under indictment, and the members of the DC Council move to vote him off and overturn the will of the voters for a second time, that's a hard vote to take. I don't know whether they would be able to, but I think that the thing going against White is Congress and Trump, that the council does not want to give any opening for Congress or the president to come in and do anything to mess with home rule. But at the same time, I tend not to moderate debates too much anymore. I've just kind of gotten out of that. But when I used to, one of the things that I would ask every candidate is, will you commit to not overturning the will of the voters? Because we've had these voter referendums, these voter initiatives in the past that the council has voted to overturn. Term limits, years ago, the voters voted in term limits for DC council members in direct response to Marion Barry getting reelected. And the council overturned that. And then you saw the minimum wage for tipped employees. The first time that was passed, it was overturned by the DC Council. And now the mayor and the council are looking to do that again. And so it's something that it's a litmus test that I've always asked candidates is that, will you commit to not overturning the will of the voters? And some of them have different answers or whatnot, but this is the same type of thing if the Ward 8 residents vote him back for a second time while he's under indictment, is it really up to these 12 people, none of whom live in Ward 8, to overrule their vote? And we'll just have to, it's going to be a tough issue for the council to deal with. And when you ask them now, none of them want to answer. No, they all call it a hypothetical.
One of them, Christina Henderson, has introduced an amendment that would prohibit expelled council members from serving on the council for at least 5 years post-expulsion. That's too late for this particular situation.
Right.
But it seems to me they're trying to avoid getting themselves in this kind of conundrum again.
They are, and they should have thought of that before, and it's not clear whether there's support for that or not. But as you said, it's not going to happen in time for this. We'll have to see what happens in the special election. But if White wins again, he will be sworn in. So they'll have to swear him in, and then it'll be up to the council to decide what to do. Now, it shouldn't take as long because they won't have to do an investigation. Nothing has changed about the facts in the case. And so it'll just simply be a question of whether or not they want to overturn the will of the Ward 8 voters. And if they do, another special election, right? It's Groundhog Day. How many times will they do it?
But it's a fascinating calculation they'll have to do because all the regular things, like you said, the will of the voters, ethics, but this other factor that they wouldn't have to think of if they were the city council in Kansas City or something, which is the tenuousness of home rule. And I guess that's one of the things you spend a lot of time watching.
Oh, absolutely. And look, it's never been more at risk. And every day that Mayor Bowser wakes up and she's still mayor is a victory for her and for the city, because I do not envy the mayor, and say, look, she gets criticized for a lot of things that she's done, like, stripping out the sanctuary city language in the budget. And what she'll tell you is she's trying to get to the end of these 4 years and keep DC, and keep home rule in place. And so far, it's working. It's probably left a very bad taste in her mouth, standing next to her. Look at that video of her standing next to President Trump in the Oval Office, right? But she's willing to do what she has to do to maintain home rule. And I know that, it's been reported that the mayor and the chairman and the attorney general meet regularly to discuss just that issue. What do they have to do this week?
But wait, if she's so keen on maintaining home rule and they view White as an impediment to that, have they thrown their weight behind some other candidate?
That's a good question. And I don't believe that they have. I've not seen, Bowser's typical answer to endorsements is that she doesn't endorse candidates unless she's on the ballot, right? She only in those years, for whatever reason, I believe has been her protocol so far. And, unfortunately, look, our press corps is stretched so thin and there is so much to cover. And sadly, this special election has not gotten a lot of coverage. And I point at myself for that. I'm as guilty as anyone for that. And we just don't have the bandwidth to cover every single thing that's going on at a time when there's more going on than in the 25 years I've been covering the district.
Well, I hope as we get into that special election, you'll come back and tell us about it. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Michael, it's always great to be with you. I appreciate you having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.